Hello everyone. Today we will study about the stomach. Stomach is the powerhouse of digestion and gateway to our nourishment. We will explore the stomach's anatomy and physiology, all while keeping the things engaging and easy to grasp. So watch the video till end. Let's dive in. Stomach is the part of complex digestive system and working together with the different organs like small intestine, liver and pancreas, it processes the food we eat, extract the nutrients for our body's need. Now imagine your stomach as a stretchy bag-like organ located in the upper part of your abdomen, just below the rib cage. It's like a J-shaped container with two openings. One is connected to esophagus, that is the food pipe on the top, and another leading to your small intestine below. It's like a muscular sac with four main parts: cardia, entry point, fundus, upper curvature, body, central portion, and pylorus, that is the lower portion. Cardia is the uppermost part of the stomach and is situated near the lower esophageal sphincter, which separates the stomach from esophagus. It acts as a transition area between the esophagus and the stomach and helps to prevent the reflux of the content of the stomach back into the esophagus. Next is fundus. Fundus is the upper curved part of the stomach located to the left of the cardia. This portion is fundus. It's the area where the swallowed air tends to accumulate, and it plays a role in helping to accumulate varying amounts of food. Next is the body. Body is also known as corpus. It is the central and the largest part of the stomach. It contains majority of the gastric glands responsible for producing the gastric juices, including the digestive enzymes and hydrochloric acid. Fourth part is pylorus. Pylorus is the lower section of the stomach that connects to the small intestine, specifically to the duodenum. It composed of two parts, antrum part and pyloric canal. Pylorus contains muscles that help regulate the release of chyme that is prepared in the stomach, that is the semi-digested or partially digested food. So this pylorus has the muscles that help to release this chyme into the small intestine through the pyloric sphincter. Now what is the pyloric sphincter? Pyloric sphincter is a ring-like muscle at the junction between the stomach and the small intestine. It controls the flow of chyme from the stomach into the duodenum, allowing only a small amount to pass at a time for further digestion and absorption. Then the gastric folds. It is the inner lining of the stomach. Stomach is not smooth. Instead, it has numerous folds called rugae. These folds allow the stomach to expand and contract as it accommodates varying amount of food and aids in mechanical digestion. Now, this stomach is a complex anatomy and has specialized cells that allow it to carry out important functions in the digestion process, including the mechanical breakdown of the food, secretion of the digestive enzymes, secretion of hydrochloric acid, and controlled release of chyme into the intestine for the further digestion and absorption of food. Okay, now layers of the stomach. The innermost layer is mucosa. The mucosa is the innermost layer of the stomach wall, similar to the wallpaper of a room. It is the part that directly interacts with the food we eat. It has these pits, these are called the gastric pits, and the tiny glands that releases the stomach juices for the digestion. Next is submucosa. This layer is submucosa. Consider submucosa as a support beam behind the wallpaper. It's a connective tissue layer that provides the blood vessels, nerves, and other important structure to the mucosa. This layer ensures that the stomach lining receives the nutrients and oxygen it needs to function properly. Next is muscularis. It is the muscular layer. This is the muscularis. It is the muscular layer of the stomach resembling to the walls of a flexible, stretchy balloon. This layer has three layers of smooth muscles: oblique muscles, circular, and longitudinal muscles. These three layers of smooth muscles that contract and relax in a rhythmic wave. They contract and relax in a rhythmic wave, churning and mixing the food and the gastric juices to create semi-liquid mixture that is called the chyme. So the muscularis is responsible for the wavy-like motion that is created to mix the content with the gastric juices to create chyme. Next is the serosa. Fourth layer is serosa. It's a smooth and slippery layer that covers the stomach and reduces the friction of the stomach with the other organs and structures in the abdominal cavity. The serosa also produces a fluid that keeps everything runny and smoothly on the stomach when the stomach moves and contracts. So it provides lubrication and reduces the friction with the other organs. Okay, now the stomach wall consists of these distinct layers, each layer playing a vital role in digestion and protection, from the mucosa that interacts directly with the food to muscularis that helps in mixing and move it around. These layers work together to ensure that our stomach performs its digestion magic effectively and keep us nourished. A physiology of the stomach. The digestive team. Imagine your stomach as a busy kitchen where digestion is a team effort. Now these enzymes, gastric juices and hormones, these are the star players. These gastric juices and enzymes are secreted by special cells. These are the special cells which secrete hydrochloric acid that helps break down food and kills the bacteria. Hydrochloric acid helps in breaking down of the food and kills the bacteria. It also releases pepsin, which is a powerful enzyme that helps in breaking down of the proteins into smaller molecules. Now we'll study about the different type of cells present in the stomach. The wall of the gastric pits, the wall of this gastric pit is primarily made up of the mucus cells, and it also contains different type of cells. The glands present on the cardia and some of the pylorus part of the stomach are mainly mucus secreting cells. So there are different type of cells, but they are not present in every part of the stomach. Every part of the stomach has different type of cells. Like cardia portion and the pylorus portion, it has mainly mucus secreting cells. But the cells present in the pyloric antrum part of the stomach secretes number of hormones, including majority of the stimulatory hormone, that is gastrin. Gastrin hormone is mainly secreted from the pyloric antrum part of the stomach. The glands of the fundus and the body of the stomach. Glands present in the fundus part and body part of the stomach produces most of the gastric secretions. The main site, and it is the main site for the chemical digestion. The fundus part and this body part is the main site for the chemical digestion. These glands are primarily made up of variety of secretory cells like parietal cells, chief cells, mucous neck, and enteroendocrine cells. Now, what is this gastric pit? This gastric pit It's a small pocket in the lining of the stomach that plays a role in digestion. These pits play a crucial role in digestion by secreting the gastric juices, which contains digestive enzymes, hydrochloric acid, mucus, and other substance that is necessary for the digestion of the food. Each gastric pit is a narrow depression in the mucosa. The mucus cells, these are the surface mucus cells and neck cells. Secrete mucus that helps to protect the stomach lining from the corrosive effect of the hydrochloric acid and the enzymes. Next comes the parietal cells. Parietal cells mainly secrete hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. This intrinsic factor is essential for absorption of vitamin B12. Then comes the chief cells. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is the inactive form. It is the inactive precursor of pepsin. Pepsinogen is converted into pepsin by the hydrochloric acid or the acidic environment of the stomach. Then comes the enteroendocrine cells. It has G cells which secrete gastrin. Gastrin stimulates the gastric acid secretion by acting on the parietal cells. D cells secretes somatostatin, which inhibits the secretion of gastrin. So inhibits the release of the gastric acid, pepsinogen, and other digestive enzymes. Then the enterochromaffin-like cells. They secrete histamine. Histamine stimulates the release of gastric acid by acting on the histamine H2 receptors on the parietal cells. So these are the different cells which are responsible for the digestion. Now we will see the regulation of gastric activity, that is the gastric secretion. The secretion of the gastric juice is controlled by both nerves and hormones. Stimulus to the brain, stomach, and small intestine can activate or inhibit the gastric juice secretion. This is why there are three phases of the gastric acid secretion, that is the cephalic phase, gastric phase, and intestinal phase. There are three different phases occurs for the secretion of the acid in the stomach. But once the gastric acid secretion begins, all three phases occurs simultaneously. Now first we will study about the cephalic phase, that is also called the reflux phase of the gastric secretion. Now for example, now when you bring this plate or say a piece of chocolate cake to your lips, what happens? You see the food, you smell it. What happens? Impulses from the receptor in your taste buds and nose, they send signal to the brain, which in turn signals to your stomach to release the gastric acid and prepare your stomach for the digestion. This enhanced secretion is conditioned reflux. This phase occurs only if you like or you want a particular food. If you find it tasty, then the stimulus occurs. The sight, smell, taste, or even thought of food initiate this phase. This is only one third of the gastric acid secretion occurs in this phase. Main secretion occurs in the gastric phase. What are the receptors? The cephalic phase is primarily mediated by the vagus nerve. When the stimulus goes, when you smell the food, you see the food, when the stimulus go to your, when the sight or thought of the food even sends a signal to the cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex sends signal to the hypothalamus and medulla oblongata, which will activate the vagus nerve, and this vagus nerve will stimulate the stomach secretory activity. So the cephalic phase is primarily mediated by the vagus nerve through the cholinergic receptors. Now the response. What happens in response? Vagus nerve activates, leads to release of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine stimulates the parietal cells in the stomach lining, secretes the gastric acid, and prepare our stomach for the digestion. So this is the cephalic phase. Next comes the gastric phase. Gastric phase of the secretion lasts for 3 to 4 hours. Now imagine when you eat the chocolate cake and it reaches the stomach, it creates distension. It will occupy some space in the stomach and will stretch the stomach wall. It creates the distension that activates the stretch receptors that are present on the stomach wall. This stimulates the parasympathetic neurons to release the acetylcholine. Now again the vagus nerve will send the signal to the brain, and the parasympathetic neurons releases the acetylcholine, which then provokes the increased secretion of the gastric juice. Stimulus is when the food enters in the stomach, it triggers this phase. Main receptors involved are gastrin releasing peptide, that is the neurotransmitter released by the vagal nerve endings, gastric inhibitory peptides, and histamine receptors. H2 receptor respond to the histamine that is released from the enterochromaffin-like cells in response to the gastrin stimulation. First of all, gastrin is secreted. Gastrin will act on the enterochromaffin-like cells. It will release the histamine. Then histamine will act on the parietal cells and will release the hydrochloric acid. Now so many receptors are involved. What will happen by the activation of these receptors? Released gastrin will stimulate the parietal cells to release gastric acid. Released histamine, this gastrin will act on the enterochromaffin-like cells to release histamine. Histamine will then act on the parietal cells to increase the production of the HCl. This gastrin releasing peptide receptor will activate and it indirectly stimulates the gastric acid secretion by enhancing the release of the gastrin. Gastrin inhibitory peptide receptors also modulates the acid secretion, but less significant. Now, what is happening in this gastric phase? We will see once again. Food has reached the stomach. Stomach distension activates the stretch receptor. Vagus nerve will again send signal to the brain. Vagus nerve will stimulate and it stimulates the stomach secretory activity. Now here pH and the food present in the stomach is very important. The food chemicals and rising pH activates the chemoreceptors. What food like these partially digested proteins, caffeine and rising pH stimulates the release of gastrin from the enteroendocrine G cells. The released gastrin in turn induces the parietal cells to increase the production of hydrochloric acid. So what will happen? The partially digested proteins will release gastrin. Gastrin will act on parietal cell. Parietal cell will increase HCl and the pH will go down. Right? It creates an acidic environment and it is important for the conversion of pepsinogen to the pepsin. So partially digested proteins are stimulating the release of hydrochloric acid and pH will go down, and that acidic pH is necessary for the conversion of pepsinogen into pepsin. Additionally, the release of this gastrin activates a vigorous smooth muscle contraction to mix the juices with the food. Now we should know this. It should be noted that stomach has a natural means of avoiding excessive acid. If this acid will go on increasing and increasing and increasing, so our stomach has a natural way. What happens when the pH go below 2 in the stomach? Gastrin secretion is declined or it reduces. When the pH drops too low, the cells in the stomach react by increasing the mucus secretion also. Now the complete digestion is taking place in the parasympathetic control. Emotional distress will stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. Activation of the parasympathetic nervous system will decline. One system will run at a time. No? So sympathetic due to emotional stress, when the sympathetic nervous system will activate, the release of the gastric activity is decreased. It inhibits the stomach secretory activity. So digestion will go slow. Now comes the third phase, that is the intestinal phase. Intestinal phase starts when the chyme or the partially digested food enters into the duodenum. Receptors, there are many receptors involved. Cholecystokinin receptor, it responds to the cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin is a hormone that is released in response to fat and protein in the duodenum. When the chyme contains fat and proteins, it releases cholecystokinin, which act on the cholecystokinin receptors. Then the secretin receptors, it responds to the secretin. Secretin is released in response to the acidic chyme in the duodenum. So cholecystokinin and secretin, these are released. Now, intestinal phase of the gastric secretion has both excitatory and inhibitory elements. Duodenum has a major role in regulating the stomach and its emptying. When the partially digested food fills the duodenum, or presence of the low pH food and partially digested food in the duodenum, intestinal gastrin is secreted. Intestinal mucosal cell releases a hormone that is called the intestinal gastrin, which further excites the gastric juice secretion. Now, this excitatory effect is for short term due to the enterogastric reflux. This stimulatory activity is short term because when the intestine distends with the chyme, the enterogastric reflux inhibits the secretion. And also this enterogastric reflux closes the pyloric sphincter, which blocks additional chyme entry into the duodenum. Okay, so when the food reaches the duodenum, it is acidic in nature, it has fat, it will stimulate this enterogastric reflux and inhibits the stomach secretory activity. Also, it causes the release of many hormones like cholecystokinin, secretin. So the intestinal digestion starts here and inhibits the stomach secretory activities. Okay, so what is happening in the intestinal phase? Activation of the receptor leads to release of the cholecystokinin and secretin. Cholecystokinin inhibits the gastric acid secretion, slowing down the gastric emptying and promoting the release of the digestive enzymes from the pancreas. And secretin also inhibits the gastric acid secretion and stimulates the release of the bicarbonate-rich pancreatic juice to neutralize the acidic chyme. Now, overall, the regulation of the gastric acid secretion by all these three phases involves a combination of neural and hormonal factors. These phases and receptors work together to ensure that the stomach produces an appropriate amount of hydrochloric acid or the gastric acid to aid in the digestion while maintaining the balance between the acid secretion and production of the stomach lining. Okay, now we know that gastric acid secretion is primarily regulated by interaction of the three main factors. Three main factors are acetylcholine, histamine and gastrin. These factors stimulate the release of hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells in the stomach lining. Histamine is released by the enterochromaffin-like cells in response to the gastrin and other stimuli. Acetylcholine is released from the nerve ending in the stomach lining by activation of the vagus nerve and act on the muscarinic receptors of the parietal cells. Gastrin produced by the G cells also acts on the parietal cells. Additionally, somatostatin produced by the D cell inhibit the secretion. Now, overall balance of these factors influences the amount of gastric acid produced and contributes to the regulation of the stomach pH. Okay, now we will see how the formation of hydrochloric acid occurs. Water and carbon dioxide are combined to produce carbonic acid. Carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion by action of the carbonic anhydrase enzyme. This hydrogen ion is transported to the lumen of the stomach via proton pump, that is called the H plus K plus ATPase pump. The bicarbonate ion is exchanged for the chloride in the basolateral membrane. This is the basolateral membrane. Bicarbonate is exchanged for the chloride ion, and this chloride ion then moves into the lumen. This chloride ion then moves to the lumen. So this sodium potassium ATPase pump in the basolateral membrane creates the cell's electrochemical gradient. H plus ions and chloride ions combined here to form the final product, that is the hydrochloric acid in the lumen of gland or in the stomach. Now the excessive gastric acid secretion or the imbalance in the regulation of the gastric acid can lead to several gastrointestinal diseases. In our next video, we will study about these diseases and the common medication classes used to control the gastric acid secretion. We will study about the proton pump inhibitors and histamine H2 receptor antagonist in our coming videos. Thank you for your time and attention. If you find these videos useful, please like them and share them. And please subscribe to my channel to stay connected so that you can get the notification when I post the videos or upload the next video.